What's up everybody, my name is Danny Gevirtz and today we are talking about how I color grade. So what is color grading? Color grading is not color correcting. Color correcting is making sure exposure is properly set, making sure your white balance is set right. So what makes color grading different is color grading is going to give you the mood and look and feel. It is so incredibly important to note that there is no right way to color grade. Color grading is all perspective. We all perceive color differently. We all have different moods, different looks and feels that we want. So you're not gonna be able to take what you're seeing in my tutorial and apply those settings directly towards one of your clips that you shot, because the clip is different. The clip is gonna have a different mood, it's gonna have a different feel, it's gonna be shot at different time of day, different lighting situation. So every single clip is gonna be color graded completely uniquely. And the important thing to note from this video is just see my method and why I'm color grading the way I am. No, I do not use DaVinci Resolve to color grade. I color grade within Adobe Premiere. I just use the Lumetri tool. Like, that's really it. I personally typically like my colors to be very dark. I'm a very just like internally dark human being, and I like everything to just feel moody and dark. So that's how I color grade. You'll never or rarely catch a video by me looking like super happy and bright. So let's dive into Adobe Premiere, because that's where we're gonna get into everything and just kind of cruise through the rest of the video while I show you how I color grade a handful of clips. All right, so here we have 5 different clips. One's a close-up skin, like a darker scene. We have some drone footage and outdoor, like bluish landscape thing going on. So I put an adjustment layer over each clip, and these adjustment layers are blank. So the first thing I usually do is I come over. I don't really use the scopes too much. I don't know why I have this open, but I come over to curves. And in curves, I make a mark right here. This is bringing the shadows down. And then I make a mark up here and I bring the highlights up, and it's gonna create more contrast in your video. Then I come in a 3-wheel color theme-a-bobber, and what I like to do is add a lot of orange into the midtones and contrast that by putting bluish, tealish into the shadows. And the main light source here is giving off a blue light, so I want to mimic that with the highlights and make it a little more blue. So yeah, it's already looking pretty good right now. Just gonna increase the contrast. Come back to curves. There's a little bit yellowish, greenish tint that I'm not liking, so I'm just gonna pull those colors out a little bit using the hue saturation curve. And there you go, you're seeing what that is doing as of now. So what we're gonna do now is throw on a LUT. LUTs aren't something that you can just take a raw or a flat image and slap a LUT onto it and expect it to look perfect. It's not gonna do that. You can't slap a LUT on and then try to make adjustments afterwards. LUTs are usually the last thing that I put on a video to give it just like a little extra look or feel if it needs it. Sometimes I feel like it doesn't need it and I won't even use a LUT. Now that I have everything kind of looking the way I want it to look, now I feel like it's time that I can add a LUT just to give it a little more extra punch. LUTs I've been using recently are from Lutify Me. This is kind of the one LUT I use all the time. It's teal and orange. It's called Menrope. So there it is at 100%, but that's obviously too much. So we're gonna dial it back, add a little, pull it back. Right about there looks good, I think. So that's where I have it. That's where it was originally. So I think that looks good. Let me increase the highlights a little. Let me lighten the shadows up. Add a little sharpening. This is what the color wheels are doing. Yeah, and then that's before, after, before, after. So yeah, looks pretty good. And then what I did was I added some film grain. So as you can see here, it's just adding a little bit of texture. I love to take away that digital feel and give it a little more film look. So here we are with another clip that's a close-up. We're here, our adjustment layer. We're gonna go in the curves. do the same thing. We're gonna add a little contrast using the curves. This is a flat raw image out of the C200, so the curves are gonna be a little more steep to give it a little more contrast. That first clip, by the way, was a clip from the 1DXmkii, but this one is the C200. Gonna add a little more to the shadows, maybe not. Give it some black, make it a little more punchy. And I typically like my images to be dark on the darker side and a little more contrasted. I'm gonna come into our color wheels. We're gonna throw orangish color into our midtones. And we're gonna mimic that or complement that with some blue in the shadows. As you can see, that's already looking super good. Then I think the sun was pretty warm, so I think I wanted to mimic that in the highlights. Just maybe not. Maybe I wasn't. I don't know what I'm doing with the highlights here. Give it a little more. Yeah, it looks good. So that's with and without the color wheels. All right, do a little more adjustments, add a little more contrast, slightly. Make it a little more moody by taking down the shadows. So now I feel like it's time to add the LUT. So we're gonna use that same Menrope LUT, and poof, that looks terrible. So we're gonna dial it down a ton and just give it the slightest bit of that LUT. And what that LUT's doing is it's intensifying the blues in the shadows and the oranges in the midtones. So there you go. This is with and without the color correction, or the color grading, my mistake. Looks pretty good. And also here we have a film grain, adding some texture. I'm actually gonna give it a little more texture. Looks great. So here is a low light setting from a short film. This is also raw image from the C200. And because it's so flat, that curve again is gonna be a little more punchy. So there we go, taking down the shadows, brightening the highlights a little bit, giving it a little more contrast by pulling up both. Looks good. Coming to the color wheels. Add orange into the midtones. Add some blues into the shadows once again. And the light that I was working with here, I wanted to feel like a tungsten light because it was like a desk lamp. So I'm gonna make it the highlights a little more orangey. Just making some basic corrections here. Adding a little more shadows to darken it up. Give it a little more black to make it a little more punchy and contrasty. Yeah, don't know what to do with the highlights there. Just gonna leave them alone. Cool it down a little bit. It's looking a little orange. Maybe not. Add a little more saturation because it felt a little flat. And looks like we're taking down a little bit of greens and more of the yellows. A little more contrast. It's looking great. And I think it's time that we add a little bit of LUT action. That same Menrope LUT. That's a little too intense, so we're gonna dial it back. And just a little bit to give it that extra bit of punch. That's what that's doing. So I'm thinking that looks pretty good. Before, after. Next up, we have some drone footage. This is taken in the Faroe Islands with the DJI Mavic Pro, and this is a flat image. So just like every other clip, it's gonna take away that grain. So just like any other clip that we've been coloring thus far. We're gonna start with the curves, bring down the shadows. And I don't wanna bring up the highlights too much because the highlights are a little blown out. So I actually think I end up taking those down significantly, which I'm doing now. And I think I even do more later on. Darkening it up with some shadows, making it a little more punchy. Same thing with the color wheels. We're gonna add orange into the midtones and throw some blue into the shadows. There we go, that's what the color wheels are doing right there. And I think we're gonna come back up and darken it up and even probably take down those highlights a little bit more. Those are shadows, there's the highlights. It's looking better. Revealing more of that background. Cool, so that's looking pretty good so far. We're seeing blues in the skies, greens, oranges. We got everything going. That's before and after. It's looking pretty solid. Then we're gonna add our LUT now. Same membrane LUT that we've been using. That's even looking pretty good at that intensity, but I'm gonna dial it back a little bit. There we go. It's looking like a nice, rich image that we have going on here. Yeah, that's before and then after. Play that back and forth a little bit for you. All right, so now on to our last clip. This was taken on my Canon 1DX Mark II. What we're gonna wanna do is come into the curves, darken up those shadows, not bring up the highlights too much because I wanted to have like a more of a nighttime feel to it. Put some orange into midtones, bring out some of that color in the rock of the arch. Then we're gonna add blues in the shadow. Just kind of mirroring what we did with the midtones in the shadows. Add some blues in the highlights because it was getting to be blue hour and I want that light to be blue. Maybe add a little more orange into the midtones, create a little more contrast in the image via color. Bring the exposure down because I want it to feel more night-like. Bring the highlights down. Give it some punch, give it some mood in the shadows. So it's looking like before and after. And it's time to apply our LUT. Same exact LUT that I've been using this entire time. Ooh, that's looking bad. So let's dial that back a ton. Maybe just give it a little bit. Yeah, that looks about right. So let's put a little more orange into the midtones, give the rock a little more color and kind of create a little more separation from the background. That's looking good. Dial those highlights down. It's looking good before and after. Well, that was basically it. That's how I color grade my videos. If you have questions at all, just leave them in the comments and I'll catch you on the next video. See ya. Peace.